So one of the questions on our Udemy course by one of the students is padding versus width. And the student asked, when designing buttons or form components, when do we use padding and when do we use width, and what's the difference? So the question is about the space between the inner elements and the outer elements when it comes to Figma. This is also when it comes to web development, but this question was related to design purely. It has nothing to do with HTML, CSS. So to explain that, let's say that again we have a component here, and then this is an image, basically a forum, and then we have a couple of buttons here, and as you can see, these are our buttons. If I go ahead and bring the Figma panel here, if I drag this button out, again, if I zoom in, let me just also make it, a little bit darker on the hover mode. Here you see, if we decide to use width, you see on the right hand side, the width is set to hug, and that shows that the button is using padding to control its total width. Because again, the total width is calculated when the inner spacing is created. So here in this example, if I decide to increase the padding, let's just go ahead and increase it to 16. You see, as soon as I increase to 16, the width is increased. So what is the advantage of using padding versus width? Because here, if I just drag the button out, I can simply control it using width. Here, I'm controlling the width, and you see that it actually turned into fixed. And again, this is the difference between using fixed and using the hug version. And now, again, the main difference is if you use the hug version and go with padding, if I decide to type in, you see, my button is actually growing. However, if I decide to use the width version and ignore the padding, if I start to type in, you see my button gets overflown. So when it comes to buttons and forums, it's always better to use padding, which is the inner width. Here you can control basically how tall or large your component goes. Again, this adds up to your total width of your button, but you see here it's being grayed out in Figma, and that indicates that your inner elements use the spacing that is calculated by the padding. If you explicitly try to modify the width, and as you can see in this example, your width becomes fixed. As soon as you start typing inside, your buttons are no longer expanding based on the inner content, they just expand because you have explicitly set a width. And that is the difference between setting a width and using the padding version when it comes to buttons and forums and any other examples.